Hello, thank you for joining us for the AmVets Alternative Healthcare Summit. My name is Jeremey Williams. I'm an Iraq veteran of 3 tours in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and it's an honor for me to be able to introduce our next keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is Montel Williams, and he's the host of the hit Lifetime shows Military Makeover and The Balancing Act, and 2 podcasts, Let's Be Blunt and Free Thinking with Montel. Montel Williams is the host and executive producer of the nationally syndicated Montel Williams Show from 1991 to 2008 and was awarded the Daytime Emmy for Outstanding Talk Show Host in 1996. He has authored 8 books, 4 of which rose to the New York Times bestseller status. He was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, and graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 1980. Mr. Williams served in both the Marines and the Navy for a total of 22 years and is the recipient of several military awards and commendations. He currently serves on the board of directors for the Fisher House Foundation and the Ann Romney Center for Neurological Diseases at Brigham and Women's Hospital. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Montel Williams. Montel, off to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Montel Williams, and thank you so much for letting me participate in this year's 2021 Healthcare Summit that's being put on by AmVets, which is the inaugural Veterans Alternative Healthcare Summit. And the purpose of this conference is to inform veterans and their families on the potential benefits of medical cannabis and how they could potentially transfer and transform and transition their experience into an industry that's expanding every single day. And I really, really do appreciate the invitation to talk to you today, especially about my experience when it comes to cannabis itself. A lot of you don't know, though, and I think I may want to cover this a little bit so you understand that the reason why I was invited is because my career in the military spanned 2 branches of service and spanned over 22 years. I enlisted in 1974 in the delayed entry program and got my official discharge in 1996. And I started out my career in the United States Marine Corps, where I went through Parris Island in 1974, graduated from boot camp, meritoriously promoted to the rank of PFC, went to then be stationed at my first duty station, which was 29 Palms, California, where I was supposed to go to communication electronics school. But when I arrived there, there was a shortage of troop handlers. And so I was put into an administrative office and became a troop handler where, blessedly, I excelled and was recognized for that, excelling, and was meritoriously promoted in 3 months to the rank of Lance Corporal. Served out my time there, but in the middle, had applied for and was accepted to the Naval Academy Prep School program, which was at the time then in Newport, Rhode Island. So I left and went to Newport, Rhode Island and served there through Naval Academy Prep School. Graduated, and then, one of my, unbelievable, I think, achievements in my life is the fact that I entered the prep school with 40 other Marines. Only 20 of us or 19 of us graduated from the prep school. Out of that 19 of us that graduated from prep school, only, I think it was 11 of us received appointments to the Naval Academy. And out of those 11 that received appointment to the Naval Academy, only 4 of us graduated. So we had a really 90% attrition rate, and I was very fortunate to have been able to graduate as one of those 4. Unfortunately, though, and this is what a lot of people don't know about me, and maybe some of you know and recognize the fact that I've been very open about my medical past, and you know that I have been diagnosed with MS, and I got diagnosed with MS in the year 2000. But I truly should have been diagnosed with MS when I graduated from the Naval Academy in 1980. And why? Because right before I graduated from the Academy in 1980, I had a really adverse reaction to our pre-commissioning immunizations that sent me in the hospital for about 12 weeks before graduation. I was in the hospital for about a week and a half, having gone almost blind completely in my left eye. I had a whole series of other neurological disorders that no one can explain. I was treated. I was sent to Walter Reed, Bethesda, Johns Hopkins, the Wells Eye Clinic in Pennsylvania, all of them looking and trying to determine what was going on with me, thinking that I was just having a adverse reaction to my pre-commissioning inoculations or immunizations. But what was really going on was that pre-commissioning immunization triggered what was then my first bout of MS, and no one knew that. So this bout of MS that I was going through, completely misdiagnosed, put me on medical hold before I graduated from the academy. And as a matter of fact, I was put on medical hold for a total of 6 months. I'm one of the only graduates of the Naval Academy to literally walk across a stage and receive the diploma, throw the hat in the air, but not be commissioned on the same day. I was then reverted over and literally served for 6 months in the rank of midshipman, not at the academy, but across the river at the naval station in the rank of midshipman, until I literally fought to be commissioned, because I thought whatever happened to me because of my service. And and no one could explain why I had lost so much vision in my left eye, why I had all these anomalous neurological things that were going on in my body. And then it all kind of just cleared up, and didn't clear up completely. I still was left with some damage to my left eye, enough damage that it then prohibited me from going back into the Marine Corps, and I had to then select a NPQ commission in the Navy. And so when I graduated from the academy, for those that wonder why I didn't graduate from the academy and go back in the Marine Corps, it was because I literally was not physically qualified to go back in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps at the time had a ruling that you had to have correctable vision through 2020, and my vision was not correctable. So therefore, I ended up having to take a commission in the United States Navy. Whereupon my commission in the Navy was as a special duty intelligence officer, a cryptologic specialty. I went on to become a direct support cryptologist and ended up spending as much time at sea on both surface ships and submarines as any of my fully physically qualified classmates. However, I was still considered NPQ. So I ended up being, commissioned a cryptologic direct support officer, which really is part of the reason why my journey even began when it comes to cannabis. I ended up serving on active duty until 1989, really 88, 89. But I ended up going back and forth from TEMAC to active duty, temporary active duty, off and on, after 88, 89, and then in the 90, 91, 92, 93. And doing a very special program with the military back then. But each time and everywhere I went, I ended up going to sickbay because all of these strange neurological anomalies continued throughout my entire service. I would go to a doctor, and the doctor would say, that's really weird. I have no idea what it is. And the reason why they couldn't really determine what was going on with me is because if we look back in time, you see that all of the information that doctors received about an illness like MS, back then, most of the written data said that MS was a disease found normally in Caucasian women of Northern European descent. And of course, I didn't fit that bill. So therefore, somebody would say, well, it kind of looks a little weird when we look at your MRI. You look like you might have something called it. You have some lesions that could be associated with something called MS, but you don't fit the other qualifications. And, I was a powerlifter at the Naval Academy and a powerlifter for a lot of my early years, though I fortunately was able to take off a lot of that weight when I was finally diagnosed with MS. I back then was walking around at about 210 to 215 pounds with a 29, 30-inch waist. And, I was picking up weights like crazy and moving a lot of steel around. And so a doctor would see me walk into the office and go, you can't have MS. It can't be that. It's got to be something else. And they could never figure it out. Well, that continued all the way through until the year 2000. After I got out and came off active duty, started my show. I would go in and out of the doctor's office complaining about 1 or 2 or 3 different neurological symptoms, none of which a doctor could explain, until I went through what was a significant MS bout in the year 2000 that literally sent me into a doctor who did all of the proper in-office tests and evaluations and said, you know what, I really think, and though you probably, you're going to want it yourself, you're going to want your own second opinion, but I really think that you might have MS. And I was like, MS? What is MS? Am I one of Jerry's kids? And realized that was an entirely different disease. That's MD, not MS. So I started researching really hard and trying to figure out what is MS and why do I have it, A, and B, is there anything that could be done about this? And that bout that I went through, I should say, was characterized by what this disease left me with, which was extreme neuropathic pain in my feet, my lower extremities, my side, something called trigeminal neuralgia in my face, where my face was like almost on fire. And I was seeing several doctors around the country, but my primary doctor, and I won't give out his name, was at one of the most prestigious universities in this country. And the initial protocol and prognosis that he gave me was that because this bout that I had gone through had triggered such an incredible inflammatory response in my nervous system that was sending this shooting pain, this would probably be one of the primary symptoms I was going to have going forward. And so back then, this is 2000, and that doctor and all doctors across this country, when they started trying to determine how to deal with pain, they jumped to the first layer of defense, which was the opioid train. And back in 2000, I was put on that opioid train. And it took about 6 months for the doctors to realize that I don't have the same, or don't get the same response from opioids as other people do. And, where some people might take one or two of certain types of pills, 3, 4, 5 of them really weren't satisfying my pain needs. And I found myself from about 2000 to 2001 and a half chasing doctors to write me more and more prescriptions for every form of opioid that you could probably get back in those days. And I'm not going to name any drugs because some of those drugs are of benefit to some people, but they were of no benefit to me. I ended up taking them to the point where I almost shut down my kidneys and my intestines because, I could take a handful of them in the morning and another handful of them in the afternoon. And yes, they might put me into a stupor where I would literally drool in a corner and cry because they didn't really take care of my pain. They did a little bit more to disorient me, but the pain was still there. And, I started calling doctors on each coast and doctors wherever I was to see if I can get prescriptions for more and more and more. And finally, my primary care doctor recognized that I was doctor shopping opioids and told me, Montel, I'm done with you. I'm not writing you another prescription for opioids. And as a matter of fact, I know some of the doctors that you've reached out to, and I've reached out to them already and told them that I don't want them writing you prescriptions for opioids either, because they're doing you no good. This is going to end up killing you, or it's going to end up hurting you really badly. And he said to me, and I will never forget his words, and again, this is a doctor at one of the most prestigious universities in this country. He said to me, and this is back in 2001, well, look, I heard that there's this stuff marijuana, and there's a particular type of marijuana that I heard about that seems to help people who are in your situation. And I don't know about it. I'm never going to say I said it to you. And that's because of the draconian laws that we had at the time. But he said, I'm never going to say that I said it to you. But I think what you need to do is go do your research. You've done a lot of research on MS, do a lot of research on this and figure it out. But I think there's something called some CB something. I don't know what it's called. It's a really different type of marijuana, but you ought to look into it, and you might get some of the relief that some of my patients have told me that they've gotten from it, which immediately set me on a journey. 20 years ago, long before the idea of cannabis became vogue and there became this huge green rush and everybody and their mothers are out there trying to figure out how quickly they can make as much money as they can, I started digging into cannabis. Had I been a cannabis user before that? Yes, on occasion. In my teen years, had I dabbled in it? Yes, on occasion. Recreationally, or I should say in an adult use way, but not on a particularly regular basis. But I had dabbled, and I couldn't figure out how can this stuff called cannabis or marijuana have any medical benefit when really all it does is try to get you high. So that's what made me really stop myself. And this is what I'm going to suggest to all of you out there that are listening in. Stop just listening to other people's word. In fact, do the study and the research yourself. Because if you did the study and the research yourself, you'd find out what I found out back in 2002. Long again before there was this big, green rush in America and around the world about now all of a sudden recreating the wheel that had already been created for thousands of years on the planet, that there is something efficacious about marijuana. So efficacious, I found out myself back in 2002 that contrary to what everybody has been telling you, telling a lot of us and telling the world, marijuana is a medical agent and has been considered such for well close to 4,000 years. So much so that our own U.S. government has been dispensing cannabis for well over 40 years in this country as a medicinal agent through a program that was started at the University of Mississippi under George H.W. Bush. When the University of Mississippi first started studying cannabis and started dispensing cannabis, I've said it yet correctly, the United States government has been dispensing cannabis for over 40 years to about 20 patients at the time when it started, 22 patients. Now it's probably less than 4 because those that were in the program have started to die out. But they still, every single month from the University of Mississippi, dispense a canister of cannabinoids or of marijuana cigarettes to about 5 patients in this country who are allowed to use this anywhere, take it on airplanes, cross state lines, cross, city lines, with a canister of marijuana grown by the FDA. And they did so because the United States government back in 2002, something that you need to know, all of you need to know, especially tuned in today, that the United States government has owned a patent on cannabinoids since 2002 that it gave itself. That's patent number 6630507. And in that patent, there's something that's called an abstract where you're required to write what you think and why you think whatever your application is, why you think you deserve to get the patent. And in that abstract that the U.S. government wrote back in 2002, and they started writing this back in 1998, the U.S. government had found through its own studies at the University of Mississippi, funded by our taxpayer dollars, that cannabinoids have been found to have an antioxidant properties related to and unrelated to mDNA receptors antagonism. This newfound property makes cannabinoids useful in the treatment of prophylaxis of a wide variety of oxidation-associated diseases, such as ischemic, age-related, inflammatory, and autoimmune diseases. The cannabinoids are found to have a particular application as neuroprotectants, for example, in limiting neurological damage following ischemic insults, which means stroke insults, such as stroke and trauma, and in the treatment of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and HIV dementia. Non-psychoactive cannabinoids, such as cannabidiol, which we've heard of and a lot of you have heard of as something called CBD, are particularly advantageous to the use because they avoid toxicity that is encountered with the psychoactive cannabinoids, as in THC, at high doses, useful in a method of present intervention. So here's our own government applying for and granting themselves a patent on cannabinoids, and then this is the same government that for the last 20 years has said out of the other side of its mouth, cannabis has no medical value, which is a bald-faced lie. To have it been scheduled, a Schedule I drug, claiming that it has no efficaciousness whatsoever as a medical agent, and then turn around and give themselves a patent claiming that it does, knowing that down the road it would be recognized as a viable medicinal agent, shows you the hypocrisy that we've been living under. And that was over 19 years ago. So for those of you who have come to this conference and come to this summit wondering whether or not there is any medical efficaciousness to cannabis, I want any one of you that's ever asked in the future, well, I heard that marijuana is not really a medical agent. You hear people from Jeff Sessions and to others who have made these kind of crazy statements, not even knowing that at the same time, your taxpayer dollars were going to upholding that patent that the government has, claiming that it is a medicinal agent. So when I started doing my research back in 2002 and I stumbled upon this, I was thinking to myself, are you kidding me? If our government believes that this works, why shouldn't I? And I started seeking out CBD-laden cannabis, and then found out even more about cannabis that I didn't know. As I started to do the research, I started to recognize that, contrary to popular belief, cannabis is one of the things that this country was built on. Most of you don't even know that the entire Revolutionary Army was clothed in hemp fiber clothing. The word cannabis, or the word canvas, comes from cannabis. We utilize cannabis or hemp back. All of our forefathers who founded this nation were hemp growers and hemp distributors. Why? Because we used hemp fiber and the cellulose material to do things like make sails, make ropes, make clothing. Every single sail on our sailing vessels was made from hemp. We ate porridge made from hemp seeds. Why? Because we found out that hemp seeds are one of the most protein-laden seeds on the planet, and very, very rich in omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. And early Americans ate cannabis, hemp, on a regular basis. If you look at newspapers at the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s, and the 1900s or in the early 1900s, and you go to the classifieds, you will see that in the classified ads, there are thousands of tinctures, hundreds of them listed for medicinal purposes, tinctures and medications that were based on cannabis. It wasn't until 1937, through an act that was called the Marijuana Tax Act, that cannabis was made illegal. And it was made illegal, championed by a gentleman by the name of Anslinger, who had been one of the nation's biggest prohibitionists for alcohol. And when prohibition ended and he lost his job, he needed to find something else to jump on to get paid. So he jumped on this, along with the help of his buddies, William Randolph Hearst and Charles DuPont. DuPont trying to make sure he could sell something called textiles, and Hearst trying to cut down all of the big trees in the entire western part of the United States, and saw hemp as a threat to his business. And they also needed to have some way to re-enslave those people that they wanted to get a yoke back around the necks of. So people of color, brown and black. And we started out on a mission back in 1937 to make it illegal. And even by 1941, there were several studies that came out that said that this was one of the most egregiously offensive, arbitrary rulings that our government had ever made. Hemp and cannabis were not reinstated, but allowed to be grown during World War II because we still needed the fiber for sails and rope. So there was a Hemp Act passed during World War II. Immediately following was made illegal again and kept illegal until the Nixon administration put it as a Schedule I drug, not because they saw it as a dangerous drug. No one in the history of the world had ever been found to have died of an overdose of cannabis at that point in time. But this was something that societally we needed more for a way to imprison those and help fill the ranks of our for-profit prisons around the world and around the country. And in an effort to find something that they knew that they could grab, that you could find easily, maybe in the pockets of those when you saw them walking on the street, those that you wanted to make sure that you enslaved again through bars of prison. Which brings us to today. During the 1970s and 1980s, here in the United States, most of our growers and farmers, and we were growing cannabis in not only in the western part of the United States, the northwestern part of the United States, but we were growing in the center, in the heart of this country, in places like Kentucky and northern Tennessee. As a matter of fact, the cornbread mafia out of Kentucky and Tennessee were probably responsible for providing and producing the majority of the cannabis sold in the United States during the early 1980s and late 1970s. But one of the things that they were attempting to do back then was to grow the CBD out of the plant, because they wanted to have a plant that was stronger and hardier with more THC, the psychotropic cannabinoid that people thought was only solely responsible for the psychotropic effect, where we now know that that's not true. So when I first started searching back in the early 2000s for cannabis that was heavily CBD laden, I found it very difficult to come across any cannabis that was of use. But I was lucky enough to find a grower in Northern California in Humboldt County that literally had a strain, a cultivar of cannabis that had high level, and at the time, high level of CBD was about 7.5 to 8% CBD to about 15 to 18% THC. And I was able to find that cannabis and tried it myself early 2002, and I've never looked back, because where opioids left a void, cannabis filled it for me. Though it didn't completely mitigate my neuropathic pain, it made it bearable enough that it didn't bring tears to my eyes every time I thought about it. And then I started to recognize all the other beneficial things that were happening to me by using a higher CBD laden cannabis. It was starting to reduce my nighttime leg tremors. I, for the first time in close to 15 years, had a really good, solid night of sleep. And it continued. It wasn't something that just worked for a minute. It continued to work as I continued to titrate my body level up, or my own cannabinoid level up, to a point that I believe that I had saturated my then, and unbeknownst to me, my endocannabinoid system, which is something that a lot of us and a lot of people who have tuned in today don't know and don't recognize. But all mammals on this planet and several other species have something built in within them. It's something called an endocannabinoid system, CB1 and CB2 connectors that recognize and are antagonized by plant-based cannabinoids that we get from things like cannabis and hops and other things. If you had never used cannabis in your life, if you're one of those who are watching and tuned in today, if you have never used cannabis in your life, a test could be done on you to find that within your own body, you yourself, your body produces endocannabinoids, two cannabinoids. One of them is called anandamide, the other one is called 2-AG. These cannabinoids are literally picked up by receptors. The proper term would be something similar to a secondary sympathetic nervous system within our own bodies, but we have CB1 and CB2 connectors that are in our brain and in our peripheral organs that literally respond to cannabinoids. And cannabinoids that we produce are the only chemicals in our body that literally run retrograde in our system. They run in the reverse in our system. They literally let your brain know whether or not your cells are in what we call the Goldilocks zone. Not too hot, not too bad. They're in what we call cellular homeostasis, just right. There's a lot of science out there right now and a lot of research out there right now that is studying and starting to determine that it is through deficiencies in our endocannabinoid system that a lot of our disease that we see today could be caused by deficiencies in those two endocannabinoids. And those endocannabinoids are released within our bodies in response to the cannabinoids that we ingest or we put in using cannabis. And so this conference is going to be about educating you not only on cannabis use and what it's useful for, and we're starting to see studies being done from everything from epilepsy to seizures to cancer to eating disorders to you name it. But there's more solid research being done now than there ever has been on cannabis. So for those people who say, well, we just need to make sure we do enough research to make sure that we're telling people to do the right thing, the research has been done. There's probably 10 times as many peer-reviewed, studied research documents published in the world today on cannabis than there are on alcohol. And we know the negative effects of alcohol. And so I hope that as part of this HEAL program that AMVETS is sponsoring and moving forward, and HEAL meaning healthcare, evaluation, advocacy, and legislation, that we all participate and help trumpet at the loudest that we can the fact that there is a medication out there that can be of use if utilized and used the same way, utilized the right way. I must say that my initial journey to everyday use of cannabis started with trying to find a higher CBD-laden cannabis. But as I've studied and researched, I've started to realize that, we have been misled to believe that there are only two cannabinoids that are of value, one being THC and the other being CBD. There's probably research that's been done around the world right now that states that there could be as many as 160 different cannabinoids. We've identified a lot of them. Everything from CBD to CBG to CBN to CBC. We've also realized that there's value in some of the minor cannabinoids and some of the minor other constituent parts, like terpenes and flavonoids. Matter of fact, there's been recent peer-reviewed study documentation released that has stated that some of the flavonoids found in the cannabis sativa plant have a better anti-inflammatory effect than most of the pharmaceuticals that we've seen in the marketplace for the last 50 years. And so why do I use cannabis? I use it because it's something that is naturally grown, something that has been used now for thousands of years. No one has died from it. And the proof is in the pudding when our own government itself makes a statement that it believes that it has the properties that it has. And so I want you all to truly enjoy the rest of your conference. Understand that there's information here, but don't just be satisfied with what you hear in the next day. Make sure you do the research yourself. Try to find out as much information as you can so you can make the proper choice for you and your family. I thank you so much for letting me be a part of this AMVETS Well Healing Program. I wish you all much success, and I thank you all for your service.